There is a unit of measurement in Japan that you don't reach for in Tokyo. You don't reach for it in Osaka. You reach for it when you are in a farmhouse, in a mountain village, in a place where the houses are built low and the hedges run high. Shaku. A shaku is about 30 centimeters. It is the unit a tatami mat is sized in. It is the unit a longsword is measured in. It is the unit that comes out of an old man's mouth when he points up at a roof beam and says, in a tone that brooks no argument, "That is 6 shaku tall." So when a grandmother in a village in the Japanese countryside says to her grandchild, with the kind of quiet that has weight in it, "She is 8 shaku tall," the child does not need to translate that into meters. The child knows what 8 shaku is. The child knows what is too tall. The village in our story is a place we will not name. The author did not name it either. They called it Shishi-muru, the way you refer to a place you don't want cursed further by being known. It is a sanson, a mountain village. Old wooden houses, wide verandas, hedgerows grown high enough to keep the wind off the rice paddies and the children in the yard. A teenager used to come to this village in the spring. They would borrow a parent's motorbike, a small 1970s machine, and ride out from the city for a few days, a week, whatever the break allowed. They liked the farmhouse. They liked the feel of it. They were in their last year of high school. They had not yet been to a university. They had not yet been anywhere that mattered very much. They were 17, and spring break was still a kind of holiday. It was the start of spring break. Late winter, technically, but the sun had begun to put weight on the day. The grandparents' farmhouse had a wide wooden engawa, a veranda that ran along the side of the house, deep enough to sit in, deep enough to lie down in, and warm enough on this particular afternoon that the teenager was sitting on it with their face tipped toward the sun. And then from somewhere beyond the hedge, po-po-po, po-po-po-po, po, po. It was not a mechanical sound. It sounded like a person making it. It could have been a voiced consonant or a half-voiced one. The teenager could not tell. They looked around. The garden was empty. The hedge ran along the far edge about 2 meters tall, high for a residential hedge, but not unusual in a village where the wind comes off the mountain. And on top of the hedge, set down as if it had been placed there by a careful hand, was a hat. A wide-brimmed white hat. The teenager thought at first it had been thrown up there. A child's prank, maybe. A bird, perhaps, lifting something. Then the hat moved. It moved along the top of the hedge, slowly, the way a person would walk along a path. And where the hedge thinned out, where there was a gap, the teenager saw her. A woman. A white one-piece dress, the wide-brimmed hat on her head, and she was standing on the other side of a hedge that was nearly 2 meters tall, which meant she was, impossibly, at least a head taller than the hedge itself. The teenager stared. The figure moved on. The hat disappeared. The po-po-po sound faded. The garden was empty again. The hat had moved along the top of the hedge at the pace of a person walking. The teenager had not heard footsteps. The hat had simply been there, and then further along, and then at the gap, and then gone. It is one thing to see a stranger in a garden. It is another to see a stranger whose head is above a hedge you cannot see over. The math is immediate. The math is wrong. The teenager went inside and told the grandparents almost as an aside. There was a tall woman in the garden. White dress, white hat. A strange, soft laugh. The grandfather and grandmother, who had been in the middle of an ordinary late afternoon, one of them at the table, one of them passing through to the kitchen, both went very, very still. The questions came hard then and fast. When did you see her? Where were you standing? How tall was the hedge? How tall was she? Were you above the hedge? Was her head above the hedge? How far above? The grandfather did not ask these questions the way a grandfather asks questions. He asked them the way a man asks questions when he is trying to confirm something he had hoped very much was not true. He went to the telephone on the wall in the corridor. He picked up the receiver. He closed the sliding door. And he made a phone call the teenager could not hear. The grandmother, who had been quiet through all of this, began to speak. Her voice shook. "That woman," she said, "is a thing called Hasshaku-sama, the 8 shaku woman. She is a yokai. She moves through the village when the conditions are right. The old people know her. She has been here longer than any of us. She was here before this village had a name. When she chooses someone, and the choosing is the thing you cannot argue with, they are said to die within days, adults as well as the young. But the young are her preference. She has been kept here in this district by a seal. 4 Jizō statues at the 4 boundaries of the village. A north stone, a south stone, an east stone, a west stone. The seal is old. The seal is community property. The seal is the only reason anyone in the next district has not seen her." The teenagers sat and listened. They did not yet fully understand the shape of what was happening. They understood that something very bad had begun, and that the family had been preparing for it without telling them. The grandfather came back into the room. He had been to a neighbor's house. He had brought back an older woman, small in a dark kimono, with the kind of face that has seen a great many things and has decided not to be surprised by any of them. The grandmother called her Kei-san. The village, the teenager would learn, called her the prayer person. Kei-san looked at the teenager. She did not say, "Are you all right?" She said, "Listen carefully. Do not let the ofuda leave your body. If something happens, pray in front of the Buddha." She handed them a small paper talisman. The teenager was then led upstairs. The room on the 2nd floor had been prepared. Every window was papered over with newspaper. On top of the newspaper, small paper talismans, ofuda, had been pasted. In each of the 4 corners of the room, a small conical pile of salt. In the middle, a low wooden box on which sat a small brass Buddha. A futon had been laid out. An old CRT television, the kind that hums when it is on, sat in the corner. And by the door, 2 small chamber pots, set out with the resigned practicality of people who understood that the young person in the room was not going to be leaving it. This was the kekai, the ritual barrier. The room was a small, marked space where the rules of the outside were, for the duration of the night, suspended. The grandfather stood at the door. "Sunset is coming. Listen to me. You do not leave this room until morning. Your grandmother and I will not call out to you. We will not speak to you, not for any reason. Not even if you hear our voices. Do you understand? Not for any reason. At 7 in the morning, you come out. Before then, you do not open the door. Not for anything. Not even for me." The teenager nodded. The grandfather's face was the most serious face they had ever seen on an adult. The grandmother brought a futon. The grandfather brought a tray of food. The teenager ate without tasting it. The news played on the small television, the sound at low volume, the way it sounds in the background of a house where no one is really watching it. The teenager fell asleep. They woke to a late-night program on the television. They looked at their watch. It was just past 1 in the morning. And then, cots. Cots. A tapping. On the window. The window that had been papered over with newspaper and ofuda. The tapping was soft, patient. The tapping of a single knuckle on glass. The teenager told themselves it was the wind. The tapping did not stop. Then, from the other side of the door, in the corridor, the teenager heard a voice. "Hey, are you all right? If you're scared, you don't have to push yourself." It was the grandfather's voice. But the grandfather had said, "We will not speak to you, not for any reason." "What's wrong? You can come this way, you know." It was the grandfather's voice, but the phrasing was slightly off. The teenager could not have said how. They had not heard their grandfather speak in a few hours, but the voice was a copy. A careful copy. A copy that had heard the grandfather's real voice and was now, with great patience, using it. The teenager's hand went to the doorknob. They thought of the grandmother's instruction. Do not leave the room. They let go of the doorknob. They reached for the cup of tea they had made earlier, and their hand was shaking so badly that they had to put it down. They turned the television up. The voice from the corridor kept speaking in the grandfather's voice in a way that was almost kind. And then the teenager looked at the four corners of the room. In one of the 4 piles of salt, the top half had turned black. The next moment, the tapping on the window grew louder. Tom, 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 tom. And below the tapping, rising from below the window, the soft, breathy sound, po-po-po-po, po, po-po-po. The teenager ran to the Buddha. They knelt. They pressed the ofuda into their hands. They began to pray. At 7:13 in the morning, the grandmother was at the door, crying, saying, "Good, good, you are all right." The father was downstairs. The grandfather was outside, his face at the window of the car, saying, "Get in, quickly." In the garden, a 1-box van was parked. 9 men from the village were already inside, all of them, the teenager would learn, blood relatives of the grandfather. A thin thread, a single thread of shared blood, but it was the only thread they had. The grandfather's K-truck would lead. The van with the teenager would be in the middle. The father's sedan would bring up the rear. The drive would be slow, 20 kilometers an hour, maybe less. Kei-san sat in the passenger seat of the van, eyes closed, hands folded, beginning the nenbutsu. Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu. An older man in the back leaned over. "From here, close your eyes. Look down. We will not be able to see her, but you will. Do not open your eyes until I say." The teenager closed their eyes. The van moved. The nenbutsu continued. The teenager kept their eyes closed. After 10 minutes, Kei-san said in a low voice, "This is the part that matters." The teenager opened their eyes a crack. Outside the tinted window, a tall white shape was moving with the van. The white brim of a hat level with the top of the window. A pale dress sleeve. The figure was alongside the van, matching its speed, her head above the roof line, her face. They could not see her face. They could see the brim of the hat. They could see the way she was leaning very slightly to look in. A small sound escaped the teenager. The man next to them said sharply, "Don't look. Pop, 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 pop." Louder now. Closer. The tapping on the window began again. The same patient cots, cots, cots. And the men in the van made small sounds under their breath. Eh, eh, The way people do when they are holding a great weight. Kei-san's ninbutsu grew louder, and then, suddenly, the sound stopped. The tapping stopped. The popopo stopped. Kei-san exhaled. We made it out. We made it out. The men around the teenager, who had been silent for the whole drive, began to speak again, in low, relieved voices, the way men speak when something is over that they had not been sure would end well. Back at the farmhouse, the grandmother had breakfast waiting. Kei-san gave the teenager a new ofuda. The old one, the one they had been holding all night, was black. It worked, Kei-san said. It is spent. You will need a new one. The grandfather, who had not been an unkind man before this, became, after this, a man with one rule. Do not come back here. Not for any reason. Not for New Year, not for Oban, not for my funeral. Do not come back. The teenager did not come back. A few years later, the grandfather died. The teenager was not at the funeral. They were not told until after. Years passed. The teenager moved to a city. They were 27 years old. They had a small apartment. They were not, by that point, the kind of person who believed very much in the old stories. They told themselves it had been a childhood thing. They told themselves the seal was symbolic. They told themselves there was a rational explanation for everything that had happened, and that the rational explanation simply had not yet been written down. And then the grandmother called. The Jizō statue on the road that leads to your house, she said, in a voice that had aged 20 years in a single sentence. Someone broke it. The teenager asked the grandmother carefully, in a voice that tried to stay steady. That night, did you call out to me? I did not, the grandmother said. The teenager is 27 years old. They do not believe as much as they used to, but they are worried. They are quite worried. The story was first posted on the 26th of August, 2008, on a Japanese internet forum called 2channel. The post was anonymous. The post was in Japanese. The post was, by the standards of the genre, very long. 6 posts of continuation, because 2channel's per-post character limit was small and the story was too large to fit in a single post. The genre is called Share-kowa. Share, as in a joke, kowa, as in scary. The full name translates roughly as scary in a way that isn't a joke. It is the longest-running horror genre on the Japanese internet, and it has been running since the year 2000. Hasshaku-sama is, by general agreement, the defining masterpiece of the genre. It is the story other stories are measured against. It is the story a Japanese person will say, "Have you read the one with the 8-foot woman?" And the other person will say, "Yes." Years after the original post, a video game character was officially cited by the game's developers as having been partly inspired by Hasshaku-sama. The character is the tall woman in the wide-brimmed white hat. The character is in Resident Evil Village. You have probably seen her, even if you have not played the game. The seal is community property. 4 Jizō at the village edge. 4 stones at the 4 directions. The old residents of the area, in exchange for water rights agreements with the surrounding villages, asked for the seal to be permitted. One of those 4 stones is broken now. Someone broke it. The narrator does not know who. The narrator does not know why. The story is not over. It has never been over. It is the kind of story that is, at this very moment, still happening to someone, in a village we will not name, with a hedge we will not measure, behind a door we will not open. If you're scared, you don't have to push yourself. Sleep well, dear listener.